Então, muito boa tarde a todos os que estamos aqui no final desta exposição que para nós foi muito gratificante ter aqui na Ordem. Teve vários visitantes, inclusivamente estava a dizer há pouco o Conselho Diretivo Nacional que veio cá fazer-nos uma visita e que também estiveram a ver a exposição. E também pela própria temática que é muito atual e que todos os dias a gente fala sobre ela, sobre a questão do património, da classificação do património, do que é que a classificação do património pode representar em termos de preservação e de conservação do valor, como é que podemos preservar os valores que temos. Portanto, é sempre uma temática que é muito cara, é muito presente, tanto na nossa vida de arquitetos como na própria Ordem dos Arquitetos, e por isso esta exposição também tem um significado mais especial e pertinente. Agradecemos a presença da Spela, que veio hoje fazer a conferência agora de seguida, também da Matea, que já cá esteve na inauguração e que hoje volta a visitar-nos e brindar-nos com a sua presença, aos convidados também que vão estar depois no debate, à Teresa Cunha Ferreira, ao Nuno Grande, que também agradecemos, e à Cristina Calheiros, que está aqui em representação do Cônsul da Eslovénia, do Consulado da Eslovénia, que foi essencial para a construção desta exposição e deste programa associado. E não vou demorar mais tempo, vamos então começar com a conferência da Spela e depois seguiremos. Primeiro vamos começar com as palavras da Cristina e depois faremos então a conferência da Spela.
Boa tarde, são apenas uns agradecimentos institucionais em representação de Sua Excelência o Cônsul da República da Eslovénia no Porto. Venho agradecer em nome de Sua Excelência a Embaixadora da República da Eslovénia em Portugal, a doutora Blaska Kepic, à Ordem dos Arquitetos no Porto, por ter recebido a exposição do arquiteto Joseph, tendo disponibilizado este magnífico espaço e também o espaço da exposição, e a todos os seus colaboradores que se empenharam para o sucesso desta iniciativa. Muito obrigado. Em especial também agradecer à arquiteta Filipa Guerreiro, da Direção da Faculdade de Arquitetura, e à arquiteta Teresa Ferreira, desde a primeira hora terem também acolhido esta exposição e ajudado a organizar também esta conferência, que pode trazer exatamente uma mais-valia para futuras colaborações e relacionamentos na Unesco, no sentido de avaliar também outras candidaturas. Agradeço a todos os presentes a participação, colocando ao dispor para qualquer assunto que necessitarem do Consulado da República da Eslovénia aqui no Porto. Muito obrigada e desejo de continuação. Bom evento.
Thank you very much. Is it okay? Okay. Dear hosts, many of you, I'm very grateful to be here, to the association, to the faculty, to the consulate. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm conveying kind regards from our minister, from our ministry. We are very happy to be here. It's an occasion of Plecnik here, as you know, and we're trying to tell the story and tell the messages of why we did the UNESCO project, why it's important for us, and what messages does it carry for the humanity, so to speak. So I will try to give a short lecture. I will be mindful of the time, but anyhow, please wave if I go in too deep. The intention is to briefly explain how we started, why it took us so long, which is a normal time span, but anyhow, what are the challenges that we are facing now, and what are the future questions? And I'm sure that some of these will be addressed during the consequent roundtable discussion. So let us begin. I won't talk about the architect or his work, because you have a wonderful exhibition downstairs. And as I know, and I'm sure that my colleague Natalia from the Museum of Architecture and Design gave an inspiring lecture, because she's really passionate about the work, and this is the passion that we share. Yeah, good. So I like to say that the whole nomination process, so the nomination for the so-called World Heritage Cultural and Natural List, was actually a process of reflection. It's not only a technical work and a scientific work, but it's mostly a conceptual work that has to be carried out. And it's an expert work that needs to be done in a multitude and in a larger group. And it's not about only the experts on the subject, but it's also the experts on the World Heritage Convention and the World Heritage concepts. And we've had a wonderful meeting and exchange during the day and in the faculty. And this is why I'm repeating that again. It's about world heritage. It's not about personalities. So the first difficulty, if I may call it that way, if you're dealing with architectural heritage, it's the figure of the architect. So you have to be mindful to turn your focus not on the personality, not on the master, but to turn your attention to the work. Our process of reflection, as we call it, started in 2011 after a lot of internal discussions. It was a very busy time for us because we had 2 inscriptions at that time, in 2011 and 2012, a very different one. But we started cooperation with the Czech Republic, and the incentive was to give international recognition to the church that you see here, and it's a church of Saint Spirit in Hradčany, in Vinohrady quarter, and it was a church that was commissioned and carried out by Plecnik. And later on, he also did the whole rearrangement of the Hradčany complex. So it was a complex for the President Masaryk, which is very famous, but it's not so accessible. So this is when we started to reflect on the possible nomination, which works do we want to present, and how to go on. So the first step was the so-called tentative list. This is the formal, let's say, pre-step before before submitting a nomination dossier. And you see the title that really talks about the values that are attached to Plecnik's heritage. Timeless, because it's timeless in the sense of using the history of architecture as an inspiration. You know, his columns that are sort of Etruscan / Roman, but they are absolutely creative in that sense. And it's timeless because every generation is discovering something anew. It was very different what postmodernists thought of Plecnik's work, and it's very different what we think about Plecnik's work now. And it's humanistic. It's a very pretentious adjective, I could say. Of course, it's human, it's humane, because architecture is always humane if it takes care of people. So these are the main path that we were going about. We couldn't quite get the concept right, so we asked ICOMOS as the body to give us so-called upstream advice. We never received a straightforward advice. We received a lot of very, very in-depth questions that made us do it differently. So this was then the start of the national so-called serial nomination in the category of buildings, and we submitted the file in 2020. What was important was that we conceived it in the way that we gave attention to public spaces, to public uses, to public institutions. We didn't want to get caught into stylistic deliberations. We didn't want to get caught in the whole Gesamtkunstwerk theories and so on. So we turned to public spaces, which we thought was something really special and something that we should show to the world. So you see this, it's a palimpsest of the sites, so-called component parts that make up our series. So during the evaluation process, when you're really thoroughly examined, both the documentation and the properties being examined, and this is where this file that you see, the nomination dossier that still carried the old name, was supplemented with two volumes called additional information. This is when you get certain questions that you need to answer during the evaluation process. So this is what I like to say, that it was the time where we sharpened our argument, because the continuous growth of our work then made it that we got inscribed in July last, and it was the famous decision 44-8B45, which is also our legal status now when we need to legal document that sort of gives us that backs up when we want something to get it done, and we will come to that later on. So this is what is inscribed now on the World Heritage List. It's not a property that is just drawn on the map like a city center is normally, but we decided to go and to take two axes. One is the Liubliana river that you see, and the one is the urban axis, so-called Vegova Street, which is a cultural axis that was conceived that way with the National Library, probably one of the most famous buildings. And there is a transversal, which is the Roman wall under number 4. And there are also 3 complexes outside the city center, the town center, because we absolutely wanted to show the urban grid, let's say. So because Plecnik also intervened into different spatial contexts. So that's why we also have the cemetery that actually works as the garden of All Saints. It sounds morbid, but it's a beautiful green place. And there are 2 churches that are absolutely different, and they are set in an absolutely different settings. One is in the urban context, in a working neighborhood, and the other one is on the Liubliana marshes. So we, during the process of the preparation of the nomination dossier, we were thinking about the criteria, which Teresa knows it's a very difficult job to do, and thinking about the attributes. So this is what actually embodies the messages that you want to give. So 6 criteria are available for cultural properties. We chose 2. One was fully accepted, and this is the so-called typological criterion 4, and you see what it says here. So it's an outstanding example of a type of the building. So that's why we chose different types and different arrangements and different purposes. And when you write a dossier, ours was nearly 1,000 pages, and it needn't be so ample. They don't like it. They like it short and concise, but it's quite impossible to write short and concise, because even then you get a lot of questions afterwards. So we tried to make it as clear as possible, and along the way, we discovered it's absolutely difficult to have good photographs of the axis, of the larger spatial units, and the attention was never given to larger spatial units, but rather to smaller details, to smaller interventions. So we also asked a professor that once taught at the Faculty of Architecture to make architectural drawings, which we thought was very important to do to show in a file like that. And we also presented all sorts of essay chapters, photographs. You need to have a lot of very clear schemes and so on. So this is actually one page from the dossier. But I want to briefly go through what we think are the key messages and qualities of the property. It's about what it was clear that it was very special, that it was an endeavor of one architect, of a single architect that intervened into a pre-existing town. So it wasn't building ab ovo in a open space. So there was a lot of historical layers there before. You have Roman Liubliana, which is called Emona. You have medieval Liubliana, you have Baroque Liubliana, and you have Art Nouveau Liubliana. So these are very, very clearly readable also in the city center. And then the architect, a single architect, came and managed in the relatively short span of time. We're talking mostly about the 2 decades, so the period between the 2 wars, that gradually, according to his vision, that he was able to bring out the qualities and connect the little dots into the axis and into the larger arrangements. So we thought that this was something that needs attention, and luckily we were right. So again, I'm emphasizing that the property really consists of a series of public spaces. So in that sense, it was very different than the inscriptions that are there on the list, and public institutions. What is not written here, but what we thought was extremely important, is that they are still being used. They are still in the original purpose, so no alterations, and they're accessible to public. So these were our internal criteria. So only those works out of, let's say, around 80 works that Plecnik created in Liubliana got selected by us. And these are the key messages that are then transformed into this UNESCO World Heritage language that is called the Statement of Outstanding Universal Value, and the OUV, as we call it. This acronym actually justifies the inscription on the World Heritage List. What I said is also very important, that we are dealing with urban landscape, and it is highly contextual. So no arrangement actually exists on its own. So Plecnik's Liubliana doesn't exist alone without the Roman wall, without the medieval wall, without the Baroque churches, without the classical rearrangement. So only the cumulative atmosphere really makes up Plecnik's Liubliana. And what was really significant was also that it deals, the architectural dialogue doesn't stop only in the urban setting, it's also the natural features that make up the total unity, so to speak. So as I've said, to urban access, connected by transversal access, only the most representative and most qualitative were chosen, and they form the grid. What is also quite legible on site, because we are talking about the immovable heritage, so to speak, is that you might have the best narrative, the best message, but if it's not embodied and seen and legible on site, it doesn't really exist. So when you walk around Liubliana, it is quite clear to see what are Plecnik's interventions, from being one small lamp that frames your view to having larger units, as I've said, to having different levels. And this is this relationship with the past that was established in a whole series of ways. We like to remind everyone that Plecnik was a walker. So Plecnik's Liubliana was created for pedestrians or for cyclists maybe. And this is the scale, and this is the rhythm of the city once you walk along it. The river was the first time in its history was brought closer to the residents through some interventions. The Renovo Quay was the point when the river was closest to people, and even the bridges were made into places where people could meet, look around. So bridges are mostly made into squares, which is also something that is not really usual. They might function as sort of Greek temples, if you imagine, like this one, Shoemaker's Bridge, that connects the medieval part of Liubliana with other bank, or they can be like an agora in the marketplace. So our chosen attributes were then revealing the context of the town. As I've said, the many historical layers that were then brought together, creating a town in human scale, both literally on the scale of human, but also to his needs, diversity of meanings and functions, where bridge becomes a square, and the economy of intervention, which means that it was very sustainable, but this is a contemporary term, so we didn't use it. We are mentioning reuse. A lot of materials that were prefabricated were then used for other purposes, and a lot of arrangements were made with really, really scarce sources. We also proposed criterion 1, which is a very difficult one. ICOMOS and the center don't like it, because it talks about human creative genius. So we didn't want to pretend that this architecture just came from the sky. Of course, it was a visionary endeavor of a creative mind, but we were told that this was supportive of the criterion 4. Nevertheless, this distinctive architectural expression is part of the so-called statement of the OUV that I was telling you. But this is maybe something that is mostly present, even if you're not a Plecnik connoisseur, you quickly see what are his works and his interventions. I'm not specifically mentioning greenery here, but green parts are also incredibly important, but they actually act as more of architectural elements and not as being the green nature as such. And you can see a very good example downstairs with the pyramid that was covered in turf, and of course it fell down because it wasn't, you know, it wasn't sustainable in that way. So now we are coming to the present and the future challenges. Of course, you have to have a very good protection and management system. Protection, we are talking about the legal protection, the physical measures, and so on. And the management, which really is one of the so-called three pillars of the OUV. And you're mostly dealing with a lot of different actors, a lot of owners, managers, different levels, local, state, private, so it can be quite challenging, to be diplomatic. So we have upgraded actually the management system that already exists. We tried to give particular duties to all the stakeholders, and of course to have this level of responsibilities and not to forget financing. A big part of our preparation was also to prepare all documents that we also gave out to the property owners and managers. And I'm talking about the management plans, each specific building or arrangement, and also the conservation plans, which are basis for any of the interventions later on. And now I'm coming to something that is really keeping us very, very busy at the moment, and this is also my concern for the future. I'm very worried about that despite the decades spent also with the municipality, for instance, we are getting all sorts of, you know, crazy ideas and investors coming by and wanting to do something and build something and so on. And of course, we have to be not only respectful of Plecnik's heritage, but also respect the newly acquired status, which actually helps us with the famous decisions that I have on the screen, that we were actually asked to do something that is called a heritage impact assessment to one of the projects that we actually like and can't wait to be put up, and this is the new National University Library that you have it there. It was a competition won by Beuken Perovic, one of the best offices, in my opinion, that we have. And then it really corresponds very well with the original National Library. It has a whole lot of cultural functions. It represents the Roman Aemona and so on, but it might be a bit too voluminous for the space. So we are carrying out the so-called heritage impact assessment. It's a methodology that in 11 steps shows you, you know, what are the pros and cons, to be very brief. And of course, we are not equipped well enough in that. So we had a workshop with ECROM, which is one of the 3 advisory bodies to the World Heritage Center. ECOMOS was already mentioned, and the third one is IUCN for nature heritage. And what is also quite challenging is I was talking about the contextual Plecnik's heritage, and this is why we need to be very strict about the relationship also of the pre-existing building. So not only Plecnik heritage is important, we really need to take care of all the other buildings as well. This is now the fun part, although it's a very serious work as well. I'm talking about communicating the values. The so-called OUV needs to be translated again to the key messages that are then heard, that are appreciated. And we want, of course, to raise awareness, but at the same time train as many people as possible, because there is a lack of institutional capacity with these new challenges that we're finding ourselves in. So this year, as you already know, it's Plecnik's year. It's the 50th anniversary of his birth, and we are doing a course with the UNESCO Venice office on interpretive planning, which is actually to show that even once you're writing the dossier, you need to think about this communication part, working with the communities, working with the tourist offices, to be frank, which can be a nuisance. And these are the worlds that actually collide then in this UNESCO story. And we are still insisting on the contemporaneity. We want to talk about what Plecnik's work means to us, why it matters, why it is important. So one part is the exhibition that is on show now in the City Museum, and one part that I'm really proud of, I was part of the team that asked around 30 architects, theoreticians, philosophers, what they think would signify what Plecnik's work mean to them. So we have a glossary of terms with short texts and some visuals, and you see here an object, and this is actually a sewage canalization that is being used. Once Plecnik could use it in his national library, in the church, in the park, but now it's, you see, it's not brass anymore. It's a very cheap plastic material, and what supports it's the marble from Podpech quarry, which was then used also regularly by Plecnik. Now it's protected, but we managed to get a piece for this exhibition. So this would be Plecnik's bank nowadays, but of course it looks very, very different. We also try to include new generation. So in the framework of Bio 27, this year edition with Jane Withers curating is focusing on vernacular as being incentive for today's work. And one of the production platforms also deals with communicating modern architecture. So again, a question of reading, interpreting, presenting. Of course, it's not only the exhibitions that you see, there are pop-up shops, Instagram profiles, you name it. So these are the new means how to talk about our architecture nowadays. And my final slide is also the exhibition that is on show now in Art Centrum Wien. It was just opened maybe 2 weeks ago. I don't remember anymore. The time goes too fast. It's through the eyes of a Canadian photographer that visited Liubliana several times, and it's black-white photos from the hand camera that actually capture the atmospheres, people, spiritual moments. So they are not classical, monumental, architectural photographs, but there are short impressions of Plecnik's work, what it means to the eyes of the why I also put up the photo. We have a cartoon that was done, and it's probably the fourth in the series that has been produced by the City Museum. So a curator worked with the artist to come to this comic book that actually tells the story from the letters, tells the story of the buildings and so on, and it's been translated to several languages now. So if there's any wish, just we will find the publisher and the translator, and maybe to do a comic book in Portuguese instead of doing a big coffee table book. So that's all. If there are any questions, I think that there is some opportunities later. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Spela. It was for your communication. It was very clear about the process of classification of, and that's probably the first question I'm going to ask you of both Plecnik's work and Liubliana, where he worked. So we were talking a bit a few minutes ago about this this different situation of processes of classification. You have classification of a building, of sets of buildings, of a part of a city, an urban unity, or even a landscape, a man-made landscape. So we have different types of things we want to keep from transformation, from not exactly transformation, but unplanned transformation, more or less. So the first thing I would like to ask you is how difficult it was to separate these, or the opposite, how easy it was, probably more like this, to consider the city and its buildings as a unity more than the buildings that Plecnik made and by chance existed in Liubliana.
Well, thank you for the question. I like to say that if such a nomination project was done 2 or 3 decades ago, it would surely be the National and University Library that would got inscribed like that, because it's such a wonderful building. It tells everything, you know. But we thought, and this is where also ICOMOS helped us in thinking, you know, there is not a lot of 20th century architecture inscribed on the list. There are, as you said, some particular cases, you know, the easy cases I would call them, and there are some cases of serial nominations that got inscribed because of its influence on the history of architecture, like Le Corbusier or Frank Lloyd Wright. And of course, Plecnik is not Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier. It's not even Alvar Aalto. So we had to figure out what is so significant, because world heritage is really world heritage. It's global. So in that sense, we thought that the most compelling case that is there. It's the approach to the, let's say, redefinition of the pre-existing town. And of course, it made all the difference, but we made our lives very, very difficult, because also to ICOMOS, we had to constantly explain why we didn't draw, as we like to call it, a potato, but we insisted on the particular component parts. But still, we are looking at, let's say, if you take one rearrangement of the Congress Square. Congress Square was already there. The park was already there. The structure partly was already there. But then Plecnik made it symmetrical. He made it the railings. He made the lamp. He cut up the trees after 2 decades, because there was also quite a civil public aroused against it. And he cut down the chestnut trees, and they put up different types of trees that work as the architectural elements. So of course, it's important for us to conserve also the building of the university, the Philharmonic Society, and so on. Only this together makes it Plecnik's Congress Square. And that's why all the legal protection that was already in place, because we had the ordinance protecting Plecnik work as monuments of national importance. So the legal protection that was there for the medieval town, for different parts of town, wasn't sufficient, because it was local protected. So that's why we also drew, and I didn't go into details, we drew a new buffer zone with a special protection regime to make sure that everything is on the state level. So that is why we are now looking at each intervention with the same set of eyes, starting from Plecnik to see the space, but also looking at all the other palaces that are there.
Teresa Ferreira, she has in her hands the future classification, we hope, of CISA's work. This is a totally different situation. This is a situation of classification of specific buildings, not landscapes, not urban units, not anything like that, just buildings. It's an urban, a set of buildings. But the question would be what to expect from that. That is, Spela said very rightly that we have to find a way to make Plecnik and Liubliana an important asset for a global community. So the question would be, what is the approach to CISA's work that makes his work, or could make his work, this kind of expecting for global recognition or global admiration?
Thank you for the question. And firstly, I would like also to acknowledge the Ordem dos Arquitectos for the invitation in my name and of Professor Filipa Guerreiro here, and also the greetings from the Dean of the Faculty, and to the Consulate, Honorary Consulate of Slovenia, also an embassy, and the Electorate. Also, I'd like to greet and also Spela Spangen for the excellent conference and for the amazing work with the World Heritage nomination. So going to your question, it's we are still at a very early stage, but the Dean, Professor João Pedro Xavier, has assumed this task of going. The Faculty of Architecture will submit and go ahead on developing this World Heritage nomination. The ensemble of Álvaro Sisa's works is already on the UNESCO World Heritage tentative list since 2017, with a broad group of 18 works from Álvaro Siza, with different typologies ranging social housing complexes and urban planning, or even urban regeneration in Lisbon, but also, as you mentioned, different kind of buildings, museums, schools or universities, private houses, and banks or pools and other equipments. So the question is very interesting. The key is to find a narrative and a demonstration of what is the asset added value of CISA, which is the gap that CISA will fill in the World Heritage List. That's how UNESCO thinks. It's a very bureaucratic process. It's conceptual, but it also has to be translated, as Spella said, to UNESCO formal language. So we another thing, because we had a very interesting symposium 2 weeks ago with the World Heritage Unit, the ICOMOS, and some World Heritage serial nominations, which are much more complex. The serial nominations, because they are a sum of components, but then the OUV, the attributes must be demonstrated not by each building, but by the ensemble of the work. So it's kind of complex. And there were some indirect critics that UNESCO is not a prize giving. So someone was saying in the chat, who is the next Pritzker Prize to be submitted to the World Heritage List? So the process will be not focusing on the architect, on CISAs, as also Spella mentioned, but on the works and on the attributes of these works. There is some preliminary work on which are those unique attributes of Caesar's works that you cannot find in the works of other architects. So there is some discussion on it, and eventually also on sites that are incomparable, because not all of these 18 buildings, you can say that there is not in the world a building that is not comparable. So you have to demonstrate from these 18 to select a shorter list of buildings that are really outstanding, unique, and incomparable, and together also make a narrative of attributes that we have discussed. I don't want, this is not a this is not a final, it's a work in progress, so I don't want to reveal it as definitive, but of course the relation with the context and the landscape and the site, which is not only physical, it's not only the topography or the natural elements or the pre-existence, but it's also all the intangible aspects of the social cultural context. And the discussions were held also about on how his architecture epitomizes and integrates references not only of world architecture history, but also of local or vernacular traditions, or on how this multi-scholar approach, the movement and the promenades, also the total work, the tradition of the Gesamtkunstwerk. So many, there are many discussions. Also, the approach to the issue of beauty as a function. No, this is not. This is still a work in progress because it has to be related with the narrative of the World Heritage nomination. I would like also to share a little bit on which are the challenges and the opportunities of this nomination. This is the first time that a living architect would have his work on the World Heritage list, which is also an opportunity to discuss the notion of heritage as something prospective, as something dynamic, as something societal, and not like a closed and crystallized past. And we think that this is a very interesting challenge also for the UNESCO and for the discussion of the conception of heritage in UNESCO. This would be also another challenge. Also, is that this would be the first post-war or critical revision of modern movement in the World Heritage list, because serial nominations on the World Heritage list of the 20th century are Le Corbusier, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Plecnik. So it would be the further generation. And for as regards to the Portuguese context, it would be for Portugal. For Portugal, the first serial nomination, the first 20th century nomination. So there it will be difficult and long, but we believe it may be also challenging and useful for the national and international debate. So thank you.
Nuno Grande is an architect, he's an academic, a teacher also, and a keen observer of urban phenomena, so and of cities and infrastructures. And I would like to ask you two questions. The first would be, I think you will answer this one last, but first would be about the consequences of classification processes. That is, cities or countries or regions usually are interested in classification processes for many reasons. One of them should be obviously the safekeeping of the buildings or the sets of buildings. Other reasons would be to a branding phenomena that would bring tourism or bring dynamic to the city. The first or second question would be, what do you think about the, not in such a vast way, but how could you categorize a set of different consequences to these classification processes? And the other question I would do is, why do you think the world needs CISA for?
Well, thank you for the invitation. Well, it's a difficult issue, as you have put, because of course we are discussing how to look at a recent production. We are talking about 100 years old production, and convince non-architects that this is as interesting as some big issues or big features done until the end of the Ancien Régime, which is normally easier to classify. And I think this has to do with the fact that after the 19th century, we don't have, the Prince plan or the Pope plan or the King's plan anymore. We have a liberal system that changes the way architects get commissioned. And so suddenly there's this transition between large gesture and little projects, little dots that you have to look at and find something that connects them. Your strategy was very clever, I have to say, because in a way, Plecnik belongs to, I think, the end of this era where in the beginning of the 20th century, there was still an architect, normally not in capitals, but in smaller cities, that was still an architect that could deal with facilities, public space, infrastructures. And there are not many cases. We were talking about, for example, the Vienne of Otto Wagner, for example, or Liubliana of Plecnik, or the Porto of Marques da Silva, which are, I would say, the last architects that could have a kind of a comprehensive design. Yeah, Sullivan in Chicago. Yes, true. So, and we could find some. I don't know if Sullivan is classified by UNESCO, but he should be. He should be. But anyway, the only two big projects we know of the 20th century is Brasilia and Chandigarh. And Brasilia got classified, listed. I thought it was already. Yeah, it belongs already to the UNESCO heritage. And Chandigarh, they don't want to have this classification. Well, maybe now, but I was there 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and they were like, no, we don't care. We don't care. We don't talk, don't say anything about Le Corbusier because, well, we can understand the pride they have on Le Corbusier, or what India has on Le Corbusier is quite different from the pride that Brazilians have on Lúcio Costa. And the aftermath of both plans are also different. You know, India went on being, you know, this very complicated, politically complicated, and mostly Punjab, a politically complicated area, and Brazil is still the capital of a big nation. So, but I think it's interesting to see that these are two rare cases, because what we have now, it's the work of a genius, an architect, which created these dots in a country or maybe outside. I don't know if you're including Caesar's production outside Portugal. National, yeah. But the problem is how to create a narrative that connects all the dots. That's the big issue, and I think that's one of the main issues about Caesar. Of course, we all like Caesar's works, but what makes them? What is the narrative to connect all these dots and create a theme or an idea that UNESCO would be pleased to give their signature on? And I think you did well. You put the thing on humans, on the humanistic side of his work, because in Liubliana there are still public spaces and public infrastructures that connect the dots. And so suddenly it's not just about buildings, it's about a site. So mostly, how can we make Caesar become a site? So that's the big issue that you have to think about. I have some ideas, very cheap, I have to say. But okay, so the first question. So what can we do to? What are the different consequences? Well, so we are living in Porto, which is a World Heritage City, and I think it belongs to another generation of classifications, we can say it like that, of attributing this, because it was in a moment where the late 90s of the 20th century, there was this big idea of how to make historical centers become, mostly in second cities, become also notable spaces for, you know, for the national culture. And but I think behind this was the idea of attracting, of course, investment and tourism to Porto. That's my point of view. And it really worked, because we have a over touristified city. I'm not really sure that this World Heritage benefited the city tenants. I think it benefited the city users, and this is a discussion I think we should go on having. Are we attributing these qualities to make people proud of their city, so to create a kind of self-esteem, or are we creating a branding for users, not for locals? And I think in Porto, this discussion is really important because it's true for the last 15 years, the city has been all rehabilitated, mostly by the private sector, but only the population, as we heard last time, only grew 6%. So you have like 80% of the city rehabilitated for new 6% of inhabitants. So what was the rest rehabilitated for? For tourism, for for hotels and for Airbnb, and so my idea, especially on second cities like Barcelona or Venice or Porto, is that the big consequence was a growing of the tourism pressure, but not really thinking about the city inhabitants, the city tenants. So, and I think UNESCO, I'm not sure, maybe they are already aware of this, that most of these classifications, they just improve the real estate value of the place and not really the social value of the place. And I would like to enhance this word social. I think the social issue of heritage is what you have addressed. And for me, it's what really counts. Of course, we know that people can spoil, can vandalize things, but if they belong to their collective memory, if they are part of their collective memory, I think they will somehow respect it. And so I think the best heritage is the one who is already in the collective memory. And how can we show this to UNESCO? That people are already aware that these buildings or these sites are already part of their daily life, of their remembrance, cultural remembrance or collective memory. And the second thing I also appreciated what you said is, how can we bring these little dots to the contemporary moments? How can we ask artists or writers or the new generation, creative generation, how can we invite them to look at this heritage and work about it in a respectful way, but also, why not, in a very heterodoxical way or in a challenging way? I'm not sure. By making exhibitions or new readings about these places or these buildings, or even to squat them in a very respectful way, but squat them with new ideas. I'm gently squatting them. I'm not sure. Or how can we make this public space again become a useful space and not just a frozen space? Because this is also another problem of UNESCO classification, is they tend to frozen the spaces or to create this touristic appetite. So maybe these two extremes are the ones we are not willing to go on accepting, I guess. Maybe if UNESCO has been doing any kind of reflection about the touristification of heritage. Maybe you know something about that. You can maybe go on that, because they are one of the guilty institutions for this phenomenon. Well, maybe I didn't answer your question, but well, my answer is collective memory. How can we make this heritage be accepted by collective memory, be part of collective memory, or human-centered an human-centered issue? So people, no? Because stones without people are just stones. And then CISA. What about CISA? Well, I think it's quite difficult to say that CISA is this or CISA is that, or what kind of narrative should we create about this man who played all the instruments and played all the programs and typologies. And my theory or my thesis, which I'm now defending on a text I'm writing for a research project, is that CISA is equal to democracy. CISA is the best translation of what Portuguese democracy is, because he was already somehow an anti-dictatorship when he was a young architect. He did some very nice public spaces and public facilities, which were already democratic, even in the dictatorship period. So, because he was working maybe with progressive municipalities that wanted to, for example, open a public pool near the sea, where everyone was invited to come. After the revolution, he did, we know that, all the social housing process. He did the big monuments of democracy, even the ones commissioned by, Expo 98, or, he became the architect of the regime, we have to say, in some way. So I think Cisa, as a translation of Portuguese democracy, as someone that is responsible for 50 years, which our democracy will be 50 years old in 2 years. So 50 years, or even more, because he began at least 1 decade before, but at least 50 years of work that are somehow dedicated to the idea of democratic space, democratic use, democratic symbolism. Of course, you can say, well, what about the private houses? Maybe I would keep the private houses out, maybe, because I think UNESCO does not give Pritzker prizes. I agree. They are not there for that. So maybe they appreciate what the collective memory of Cisa's works is, what collective memory they created. So somehow, I think if we could sell Cisa as a symbol of Portuguese democracy, I think it's local, it's contextual, it's political, it's social, and somehow Portuguese landscape also is very thankful for his work. But I wouldn't put that again, how contextual he is, because this is something that we already know, but we could look at all other architects and say he's contextual, he's contextual, he's contextual. And then we would have to discuss what context means. But the idea that he is somehow a symbol of a new Portugal that was built just before and after the revolution, and how this work is a symbol of this capacity of creating democratic spaces. I think for me, it's his main attribute. And that's why I think Malagueira is one of the best projects in his life, because it's city, it's infrastructure, it's public space, and it's housing. And it's multicultural, multi-social, multi-generational. So it's a kind of synthesis of all this idea. I agree that Malagueira might be a difficult place to convince UNESCO, because it has been transformed by the people themselves. It's not completed. There are still some facilities, but maybe that's already part of this collective memory thing I was trying to explain. So I think Chiado is also interesting, but Chiado, what came after the aftermath of Chiado? It became one of the most expensive places in Lisbon to live in. So I'm not sure if UNESCO will be sensitive to this, but the social housing, the social commitment, the democratic commitment of Cisa with people, with their clients, their collective clients, I think it's one of the most interesting issues I would put to convince UNESCO about his unicity.
But the thing is, it's quite recent, this tendency, this anguish about safekeeping of our past, because throughout humanity, we never did that. The buildings absorbed new times, cities absorbed new times. This idea, this preoccupation with memory, with our past, is something that is very recent. We see a Spanish cathedral, for instance, it has Roman bits, Arab bits, Romantic bits, Gothic bits, and probably a little Baroque. And it's a hybrid building, not a pure building in a sense, but it certainly is the recipient of a cultural identity of a certain place. It certainly is. And there's another thing that's interesting, this idea that what we keep is what we recognize as important to us. That could mean keeping a very poor building architecture in architectural terms. But it serves, it's used as an identification for a community, obviously a meeting point in a sense, a social meeting point in a sense. But these are other problems. But what I would really like to ask you is a little bit what Nuno Grande was saying. Have you seen, have you noticed, are you watching some of the changes that he talked about in Liubliana?
Yes, thank you. First, if I may comment, if I may jump back, my biggest fear, because I've been following the World Heritage Convention, not only this one, but the whole, but I got really busy with the World Heritage Convention 10 years ago or 11 years ago, was that I was so afraid that they would just sign us off with Plecnik as being one of the national architects at the turn of the century that Europe is full of. And that is why you have to have, and not only the narrative that you said, that you have to have something that is relevant for the international community. So I love your speech. I think the democracy in terms, we would call it community, the heritage community. It's increasingly relevant. But the first thing that you would get after your speech was, why is that relevant for the international community? It is relevant for the Portuguese. It's absolutely true. But why this is relevant for the international community? So I see the contextuality, but this is the discussion that we've been having this afternoon. In terms of Caesar's work, it's reacting to the context, reacting to the landscape, reacting to the pre-existing space, but also creating the context. And this is where I'm turning to also something that I've been also involved to the whole Baukultur system that we were talking about. And it's about the beauty, the functionality, the sense of place, which I think with Caesar, it's exceptional, really. And the balance and the emotional part, that was also part of Frank Lloyd Wright. That was a very important part of getting the emotions of the space, but again, how to translate it into the system. So, I'm not being a smart ass, but this is what you need to do. But coming back again, I would also like to say that, of course, there is a development of heritage, like Teresa was saying. You have to remember that the World Heritage List was created to defend some of the iconic monuments that were under threat for Abu Simbel. It was created for Abu Simbel. So it was the first international campaign, so to speak. So the first that was created was the so-called danger list, the list of World Heritage in danger. So only then it became a representative list. And this is where, of course, the problems begin, because all we hear now in UNESCO, and I have such deep appreciation of the colleagues working in the World Heritage Center and in ICOMOS, there's so much knowledge there and so much expertise, but UNESCO, it's an intergovernmental organization. So if you don't have the story right, then the politics kicks in. So now we hear about the representativity, about the global initiatives, and about different regions that are underrepresented. So we are now listening, and we have been listening, and it is true that half of the World Heritage List consists of European properties. And this is not a fair case, because there are countries that have civilizations that we don't know, older you know, you name it, but it's connected to the capacity of the countries to present that. So what is probably going to happen, because now there is a big discussion on so-called sites of memory, we are creating inevitably another category of heritage that is highly problematic, I would dare to say, because its symbolic value is more important than its materialized property, its site. And we're talking about not only the World War I, the World War II, but we're talking about genocide in Rwanda. So this is where we are going. So these problems that we have are easy peasy in comparison to that. So UNESCO is very well aware of the touristification, is very well aware of the capacities or incapacities of certain member states, and it's probably very well aware of the threat that is common to us all. And it's not infrastructure, it's not tourism, it's not the lack of management, it's not poor management, it's the climate change. Climate crisis is really affecting us all. So I would say that the attention is now given much more to the real issues, but the countries keep coming, the countries keep pushing. Countries want to have something on the list, mostly for the wrong reasons, we would say. But at the same time, like this prospective nomination, we need it because it's a dynamic discussion on the heritage, on the values, and on the communities, and on our understanding what heritage is. So in that sense, I think it will also be very much appreciated. It's again quite a new one. We came with something new, and it was lucky because the colleagues really suffered with Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright. You know, it was decades of going, you know, ping pong. But I think that is why this is very important. In our case, I can't believe that after 10 years of work, we still have the municipality of Liubliana coming with the plans for underground, 4 stories underground garage, yes, under the market, under the Plecnik market. And we're saying, what? Haven't you paid attention? We are not ruining this space. So these are our challenges. Tourism, I would say, yes, we are going through the gentrification process that is all around, but it's not so connected to UNESCO. It's a social thing, it's post-COVID, you know, things like that. And I'm just ending my sentence here with something that that the mayor of the town of Idria, which is the 2nd biggest mercury mine in the world, together with Spanish Almaden, that got inscribed in 2011, said, when they were writing a strategy for the municipality for the next period, I don't know, a decade or something like that, they sent out a questionnaire to all the households, asking them to identify the biggest achievement of the municipal administration and the biggest potential or something like that. So not a failure, of course, it was phrased differently. And UNESCO came in on the 1st place in both sections because it's been a huge achievement. But what are we getting out of this? People had all sorts of expectations. So you don't get, people don't flock to your town, you know, bringing you money and, you know, patting you on the back saying, yeah, super. It's only a potential that you need to be very smart how to do it.
It's probably matter of recognition. One feels recognized if its birthplace or place where he lives is viewed as important for a global community. Given what Spela said, would you be comfortable to leave CISA in UNESCO's hands?
Yes, I want to be optimistic, and I also know that he is, in some conversations, he has some expectations that this would help with the preservation of his work in the long term, because he's always very concerned and upset that the buildings are not well maintained, are not preserved, and then there are also these municipal councils ideas and projects that I want to believe that for the long term preservation, not only of his work, but also of his legacy, of his pedagogy. Of course, this narrative should include the issues of method. It would be, I think it will be positive. With all the risks of maybe Malagueira could be gentrified, and to sleep in Malagueira you have to pay 1,000 euros to have an experience, or in Bolsa we have to ask Filipa to invite us to to go there for São João, or so it's yeah, there will be some challenges. These I think UNESCO is aware, as Spela mentioned, and what you also Nuno mentioned, the loss of population, of local population, this shrinkage phenomena of World Heritage cities, or not only the ones that are historic centers, but the ones that have World Heritage sites. And they are reflecting a lot on urban governance. We did in the faculty, in the UNESCO chair, they invited us to make also a study and a paper on urban governance, because they acknowledge that of course now we have climate change, but the most threatening factors affecting the World Heritage properties are not wars, are not natural disasters, are not religious conflicts, or even development, but are the lack of management, the lack of integration between the World Heritage management plans and the city plans. No, and that happens in Porto now. This second generation management plan of the World Heritage site is more. We also worked as consultants. Was more integrated within the municipal master plan, the PDM, and is not only looking for tourism as the 2010 management plan, as that main axis tourism. Now main axis is population, housing, so it's a change, a paradigm change, we hope. So and this is a result of also the advising and the conferences and of UNESCO, and of course all the issues of participation, capacitation, or empowerment, co-creation with the communities. Yes, the 5 Cs. UNESCO has these 5 Cs, which are communities, capacity building, and communication, conservation, and so yes, of course, all these issues of working more with engaging the local, not as only as a final validation of the World Heritage plans, but as a real engagement. Also in the definition of the attributes and what is heritage. Maybe it's not the most aesthetically or physically important, but all these social values and this, of the spirit of the place. So I think maybe we both have reacted to your provocations. I don't know if something is, and to your something is. If we missed, maybe
I would like to add when I of course I spoke about the Portuguese democracy, but democracy is something that is lacking more and more in Europe, I have to say, with this rising of nationalisms. So in a way, of course, I'm not saying that Portuguese democracy is a kind of a example for everyone, but it's the last country in Europe to make a revolution for democratic reasons. I have to say, yeah, in the 20th century, it was one of the last social revolutions. And there was a lot of curiosity of people coming and seeing us. We did this project about neighboring, how Caesar created neighborhoods, not only in Portugal, but also in Berlin and in Venice and in The Hague. So I think the idea of democratic spaces or of democratic urbanity is not just in Caesar's works in Portugal or in Caesar's idea of Portuguese democracy. I think he has an European point of view of what Europe is in a kind of multicultural society. So I think, and that's why I asked you if the foreign projects were also included, because he became also an European architect on what the idea of Europe meant before, not maybe nowadays. Yeah, he worked in, but I would enhance this social commitment or engagement with the communities in every place he worked in.
I'm going to go back a little bit. Something that I said a while ago about this obsession with heritage. It's recent. It's not something that we had installed or embodied in our culture before. Probably Winkelmann went to Greece and watched the ruins and tried to understand what was that all about. And they all started to measure the ruins and figuring out that they were polychromate and not white and all that. Probably it all begins there, which is interesting because it's a time of an industrial revolution, of progress, and it's the beginning of the industrialization of memory, as some graceful thing to say about it. But Liverpool, for instance, the docks have abandoned their classification, their UNESCO classification, because they think that it's more an obstacle to development of the city than something that allows the city to develop better. So the provocation is this one with two heritage safekeepers. Should we start, and with all that Spell said a while ago about the first impulse was to react to the danger of losing some buildings. The second was probably to the recognition of few cultures. And the third is probably a more complicated one, because I'm not so sure if when discussing World Heritage, we can put into that discussion contemporary values like inclusion or other values that are quite contemporary, at least as generally accepted. So are we going to begin to see some falls in UNESCO castle?
You were talking about the beginnings of archaeology, the idea of preserving things. Someone would say stealing things and bringing it to European museums. So heritage, it's a long history of recognizing, stealing, vandalizing, and now the big issue about returning these objects to their original sites. So I think non-material things are also important for heritage, so I don't think these words are new. Maybe we found new ways of telling them, but fraternité, égalité, liberté, they are here for a long time. The thing is that we always applied it to different groups, and now today we are looking to maybe groups that were kept aside from this French Revolution perspective. And I'm very pleased to know that UNESCO also looks at these issues when it comes to create a new list or category. But if, for example, the return of things to their original sites could make them become, I don't know, some of them maybe potential places of classification, because today they might be without these items which are important for their identity, maybe. So in a 19th century perspective, what heritage is, of course, we are totally away from that, I guess. And so long time heritage nominations might be in crisis or might be questioned today, but I'm not an expert. So, but what I really agree, and I'm pleased to hear, is that other issues which are not non-material, non-historical, non-archaeological, but contemporary, are also part of this discussion. If I got your question.
I'm going to Pastor Spela, but I'm also addressing you. If you want to have questions to make, please do.
Yes, I'm in the UNESCO language. What you are saying, yes, there is the fifth C that was added, and that is community. So this is what we were talking about. Again, it's a question. So it came from conservation, from capacity building, which was directed at experts, and the experts could only decide this is important or not. Then we got into the value-based notion. So it's not so important that it is the iconic monument, it's the carrier of the values that are important to us. So we are here. And exactly. And now the development is that it's people-centered. Again, back to the community. Why? And among, let's say, among the set of questions when the evaluator comes on a mission, on a site mission, they would always ask about the communities. How do you converse with the owners, with the municipalities? How much the museums are involved, the universities are involved, and so on. Liverpool, as you mentioned, was a very painful story to everyone, but to the Liverpool developers, yes, because at the time of the first inscription on the danger list, it was actually the UK government that asked UNESCO, help us. There is no way we can stop them. So can you imagine? Because the legislation is set like that. And of course, it was very painful for the experts that had to say, we asked that. We did something that is called a reactive monitoring mission. So there were all sorts of signs, saying, please, 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 please don't do it. And then the last plans for the new stadium, of course, the football there, it's more important than the UNESCO status. Yeah. So I don't want to end on the negative note, but we have to be quite clear about that as well. As we said, there is a lot of expert knowledge, a lot of people that are really, that really invest a lot of, not forget the money also. These projects are hugely expensive, but like our evaluator, the mission expert said, he came from Estonia and he said, oh, I wish we had an architect like that. That would be worth this effort. We unfortunately don't have it. So good luck to you.
Teresa, what do you think about this, the possible declassification of not specifically about CISA, no, but obviously it's not yet classified, so we cannot declassify him yet. But what do you think about this? Is in not specifically in CISA's terms now, because as we said in the beginning of the conversation, CISA, we are talking about buildings or sets of buildings, and usually that's not where the problem comes from. The problem emerges when we have parts of a city or large sets of buildings like the docks in Liverpool. And so what do you think about it?
I think that it's inevitable that that UNESCO needs to have some rules, because otherwise you have a commitment and you submit a nomination identifying a set of attributes that that define the OUV, the outstanding universal value, and if those attributes are not present anymore or are damaged by a new development or by gentrification or by other means, the cities should be also accounted, yes, of this. So this is a very last. It's very rare, because normally there are these reactive monitoring missions, and there are more than one advertisements, and so it's not something that you are surprised. Even for the case of the historic center of Porto, there have been some denounced by ICOMOS also of some demolitions on the Cardosas. Yes, for Cardosas. So there have been also, I think, one reactive mission, and nothing happened. Porto Municipal Council has responded and gave the clarification. So I think it's a very extreme situation when it happened I think for Dresden, for Liverpool, but it's a very extreme situation. So it's just, I think, also an example to others to be also careful and attentive to preserving the attributes of their sites and of the outstanding universal value, so that it preserves that attributes. This is a very UNESCO attribute, and it's very UNESCO language, but it's how it is. So I think that could be my last statement. You want to say something? Thank you.
I would like to ask if anybody has a question.
Mas que tem a ver, sendo ou tendo percebido que estes processos também são importantes como processo, não só como a classificação, mas como todo o caminho que leva a essa classificação, eu pergunto à Spela e à Teresa, por um lado, qual foi o impacto que teve o próprio processo em Liubliana, e aqui como é que este processo de trabalho de classificação da obra do CISA como património mundial, como é que ele está a ser aberto à comunidade e que impacto é que esperam disso também?
I'm just translating. Conceição was asking two questions. She stressed the importance of the process, of these processes of classification, the conscience, the awareness of the process itself, in itself. So she's asking what impact had the process, not the result of it, the process in Liubliana, and to Teresa, what what kind of not just impact, how is this process being or is integrating the community on discussing the importance of CISA's work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart because we were first joking that we are not getting any new friends in let's say in the circles of connoisseurs or experts of older generation. They had a monopoly on the knowledge, on the interpretation of Plecnik's work. We did it differently, so it was also difficult to accept to everyone. We were accused of all sorts of, incompetencies and so on and so forth. But what is important for us and for me personally is because Plecnik was such a personality that he left a lot after his era to us, but a lot of generations after him were sort of blocked by the personality, by the omnipresence, by the, and it's a normal process. So either he had the disciples that worked with him and became his epigons, more or less, or some of his students had to really break from this tradition. They went to Le Corbusier studio, they worked there. They were really acknowledged because they were really good drawers, But it was Plecnik's path that he decided, It's a famous quote that said, I can't do what Le Corbusier does, but Corbusier can't do what I can. So it was a deliberate path that he chose. So the same happened with his students. What I'm saying is that I would say that the contribution of the nomination process was that we allowed for different voices to become heard, that we have a group of experts that are not experts on Plecnik. I'm not an expert on Plecnik, but I can talk about Plecnik's work because I'm an expert on World Heritage. So this is another set of lenses, And in that sense, I think this was really a great contribution because we also allowed for heterogeneous voices to be heard and to be articulated. So it's not only for the couple of chosen ones to talk about Plecnik, which was the case before. And this is why we're insisting so much on the contemporary approaches. We're not inventing things, Someone said that we are naive, that you can't talk about Plecnik's work with terms like sustainability and innovation. Of course you can, because this is our generation, and heritage is a dynamic thing, and it's a societal thing. Absolutely. Because postmodernist Boris Podreka, when he made this famous show in Georges Pompidou, of course, they saw it differently. So my final, I'm sort of quoting Bostian Vuga, our architect, that we had a small roundtable discussion beginning of the year, and he said, I see the biggest contribution of Plecnik's year to get rid of Plecnik.
Okay, thank you. So a very interesting question. In the case of CISA, this is still at a very preliminary stage, so it's a work to be done. I totally agree that heritage, the definition of heritage is that it is a support of identity for community. It only exists, heritage, if it is this support of identity, of collective memory of a community. So I can share some work that we have been doing with the ocean swimming pool, because we are working on a very detailed conservation management plan, and which I think that could be interesting to apply to other buildings in this process of relating with the communities. Also, there is a new UNESCO form for World Heritage nominations of last year. I think you didn't use that. You used the previous one, but the new UNESCO form has special chapters for participation and for of the communities and for stakeholders engagement. So it will be compulsory to respond also for CISA to these new categories of the form. So what we did for the Lessa swimming pool, besides the interviews we did interviews to the different municipal council departments, culture, environment, planeamento, proteção civil, and this is a little bit more the engagement of the stakeholders, but also to understand the problems that in the management of the pool, and also the threats, the risks. There is a problem also with climate change of the coastal erosion, but mostly we also worked with the communities, with encouraged surveys to communities, asking them on the attributes, so that the communities also for this conservation management plan, it will be not only the specialists on CISA that decide what must be preserved, but also ask to the communities what is more important in the swimming pool for you. And so we also did a map, a plan of the ocean swimming pool with the levels of significance. The dark red spaces were the places that the communities enjoyed the most, and then the others that didn't like also. So we cannot ask to the communities what are the attributes for you, so you have to ask them, what do you love, what do you most love. There are very nice experiences also in other countries. For instance, in Cuenca, in Ecuador, they also worked in the communities with the 5 senses, because it's very difficult to ask to the community what has value, what is heritage. So we asked them what they like the most, and it's very interesting, the answers, and which are the problems, and so to also integrate in the management plan. So they said, so there is not enough space for umbrellas and for towels, and the bar should be open all the year and not only in the Easter season. But some of were quite interesting, and also on their expectations, how the swimming pool should be in 20 years, and the results were interesting. We also did some visits that also and activities with children, because they are very also they are more pure in their reactions, in their reflections. And of course we are very lucky, because this ocean swimming pool is a national monument, but it's in full use by the communities, and it really marks the collective memory of generations of bathers in the north of Portugal. Everyone has a story in the swimming pool, or learned to swim, or so of course it's a very popular building. Yes, I got to. No, she always says they were always arguing with me when I did the project, that it was very dangerous, but I never heard of anyone dying. That was the death in the ocean swimming pool. So it's. I think it would be interesting. That's our idea, but it's all in work in process, and it's not only me. So we have to have a common strategy as team. Would be to make these surveys in on the attributes in all the buildings. For instance, also in Serralves, there are an important group which are the friends of the, you will be in the museum tomorrow, but they are very active also with the community, with the friends, but also in these open days. And so it would be interesting. But of course, the concept of community, it's not only nowadays, it's not only the local. For instance, we also did this for the ocean swimming pool an analysis on the attributes through the social media, because also the virtual community has an impact on the processes of patrimonialization, or also as a voice. And also, of course, the experts are also a community to be heard, and the stakeholders. In case of the swimming pool, there is the site managers, the Matosinhos Sport, together with the municipal council and the bar concessionaire. So, and also the heritage directorate, because it's a listed building. So it must be this common effort. But I think it's it should be an important step in the process, and it was good that you you pointed it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll probably, it's a little bit late, so I will probably end this discussion. Thank you very much, and see you soon.